Henry Prinzen, Agronomist with Maizex Seeds. Thanks for coming out to our Great Ontario Yield event today. Pretty exciting day. Crops maybe not as exciting as we had hoped. Maybe not last year's crop or the year before's crop or even the year before that's crop. It's definitely a little different feel out there this year. It depends on where you guys are from. Just out of curiosity, where's a lot of this crowd from? How close are we to Woodstock here within half an hour? Who's within half an hour of Woodstock here? Who's an hour to the south? Okay, so we got some people in the Garden of Eden this year. Who's to the east? Okay, yeah, poor guys. I feel for you guys. Yeah, so the story of the year is we pretty much have, we got three kind of regions in Ontario. I would call, the Southwest where, everything is pretty good and apparently it wants to rain there. And consistently rain, keep raining. We got the kind of middle of Ontario, call from here north. There's good pockets, there's bad pockets. It's pretty average crop. And then kind of east of here and east of Toronto, they're really tough. Niagara region's pretty tough. Norfolk, they're also tough, wherever the soils are light. So we're seeing, some of these hybrids play out differently. We're seeing lots of stuff in the field. If you guys have any questions about what you're seeing, just ask me. It's always good when you have questions. Otherwise, you're just going to hear me talk about what I'm seeing and some of the work our hybrids, we've done on our hybrids at Maizex. But at the end of the day, we'll find out later in the day what the yield is. But it's been a pretty tough crop for a lot of people. We had a ridiculously cold May. So we had some early stress, right? Who had a great emergence period? Not many farms. There's some farms. We had one of the weakest population counts in years on tour. It's pretty evident, I'm sure some people here got into replant scenarios. We had lots of that. We got, some good crops in at the end of April there, but otherwise, May wasn't that forgiving for us. And then we got into hot and dry once we got into July. So a lot of the weather stations, I got a weather station here. This site's only had 90 mils since Canada Day, so we're talking just 3.5 inches. So I actually got some pretty good stress. So we're gonna look at two hybrids. And what I've done here today, this is like my little demo plot. And usually you guys will all say, oh, this site, it's too good. Nothing ever goes wrong here. Well, this year, 3.5 inches of rain since Canada Day is not enough rain to make really nice corn. So I have 24K, so it'll be less stressed, and 38K, and I have two hybrids here that we've kind of scored differently in our seed guide. One is a kernel number hybrid and one is a kernel mass hybrid, saying, hey, where are we building yield with these hybrids, right? Are we building the yield early in the season or are we building yield late in the season? Can we hold yield early if we're under stress, or are we losing yield late because of pollination, or is it kernel weight? So what we see here, 4026 on my, I guess your guys' is left, my right. This hybrid, I like to push population. I find it doesn't lose kernel number, doesn't lose the size of ear under stress. This hybrid, we can play a lot with population. We can lower it because it has lots of flex. It flexes a lot in kernel number. And when I show you guys the ears, the story really rings true. Often I'm like kind of, oh, you know what? There's a bit of a story here, but maybe not as much. 38K ears on 4026, 24,000 ears on 4026. 38 of these is going to probably yield more of these visually. Really consistent ears at 38,000 on a year where we are water deficient, right? Then I look at my neighboring hybrid that I say flexes in kernel number. Yeah, didn't like the 38K, right? You guys can really see the difference. This hybrid did not handle that stress. We really lost kernel number. This was, I'm pulling ears in the morning going, oh, I hope this demo works. Otherwise I just make it work. But every ear looked exactly like I wanted. I was like, woohoo, we finally did it. But this is a story we've tried to preach and score hybrids on, is when are they losing yield? Are we losing yield early in the girth? Are we losing it in length? We've kind of looked at it as, okay, are you a hybrid prone to losing kernels, kernel number hybrid, or are you a hybrid that's prone to losing the top end yield and kernel weight? This hybrid, it's pretty evident, we lost a lot of kernel number when we stressed it. But this is also a hybrid we can kind of play populations with when we're under water limiting scenarios, fertility limiting scenarios. We can back off the population and get really good yield because it flexes. We get big ears. What's interesting is when you start pulling the ears and looking at kernel weight, the kernel size, that kernel number hybrid, this is a stressed ear versus the good ear, the kernels look pretty much the same size. We didn't really give up much in kernel weight. So what we see is kind of what we get. Now we're just going to coast to the finish line. The high population, the low population are probably going to have similar kernel weights. What you couldn't see from the first years is the difference in kernel weight when we stressed those hybrids out. This is the high pop, look how tiny those little kernels are. This is the low pop, look how big those kernels are. This hybrid, despite looking, not much different visually ear-wise, there's a lot more yield here. It's going to take a lot less kernels in a bushel of the low pop than this. It's probably going to be tighter than we think. The reality is, though, if we had sufficient moisture, I wouldn't be that concerned with the kernel weight story. But what we're seeing in that hybrid, we call it a kernel mass hybrid. It is flexing kernel mass down. We always flex down. When we talk flex, we think bigger ears. Think smaller ears. When we flex, we go from big to small, we back off. We're seeing that in the kernels themselves. We're backing off those kernels. Those kernels are going from a 60,000 kernels per bushel, so we need less, to probably an 80,000 kernel per bushel. That kind of makes sense to everyone. And visually, it's actually, like I said, one of my better demos where we're actually seeing those hybrids act that way. So why it matters in our book is under a perfect scenario, we can all pick the right hybrid. Look at the highest yielding hybrid in Woodstock. Look at the highest yielding hybrid in Chatham-Kent, whatever. If everything goes right, we probably can pick a pretty good hybrid because everyone has pretty good hybrids. The reality is none of us would be selling seed if we all didn't have pretty good hybrids. I don't care if you go to Kelp, Pride, Maizex, Pioneer, everyone's got good stuff. But when it comes to stress and understanding where your stress periods are more likely, dialing in your hybrid management can really take you to the next level, right? So this year, the wild card is always weather. And when was it dry? When was it cold? Well, it was cold early. So, think of other scenarios that could lead to the same yield loss. Early development, cold weather, no tillage, bad tillage, scenarios like that, minimum fertility up front, dry versus liquid starter. Those kind of things should kind of help determine what hybrids you should look for. Hybrids that don't flex in kernel number excel under those conditions because they don't give up yield from those early problems, right? Hybrids that give up kernel number have a lot more risk in those bad scenarios, just like bad weather, right? Whereas when we look at, hey, maybe you don't have a high clearance sprayer, maybe you're an all up front kind of guy and you let it coast because you got manure in your rotation. Well, maybe you want a hybrid like that because once we're locked in, if we lose a little bit of nitrogen late season, we get into a little drier weather, we don't want to put a fungicide on. Keep in mind, that's not saying no fungicide. If you have tar spot, we always should be fungiciding. But just in general disease pressure, those hybrids might not respond as much to that extra management because they've kind of set their yield potential and they're going to rock out till the end. This hybrid, we need to manage everything right till the end of the season to maximize our yield potential, right? Because there is so much yield to be built or lost here in this hybrid. And how we figured that out is every plot Maizex does, every market development plot, my team weighs every kernel as well of each hybrid. We take a sample, we take a picture, AI counts the kernels for us, and we figure out how many kernels are in the sample. We have the moisture, we weigh them, and we can figure out an average kernel weight for each hybrid. So we actually know where our hybrids and a lot of other competitive hybrids from other companies trade. When I say trade, that's where they normally are. So we start to learn this story. Plus, obviously, our team's out walking fields, understanding each hybrid to maximize our knowledge and, hey, where do they lose yield? Where do they gain yield? And we put that in our seed guide kernel number, kernel mass, so that you guys can know too. If you're a really good late season manager, you like Y dropping, you always find these years that, you know, maybe look underwhelming, but really rock out yield wise. You're like, wow, that was surprising. Those hybrids are kind of fit for you. Whereas if you're a hot guy that you always find the biggest cob in the field is always the best hybrid, it's probably a kernel number hybrid. That's probably where you want to set your eyes on. So, questions on that? Questions on what you're seeing in corn? The reality is, at the end of the day, keep in mind too, when you're looking at plots this fall, what happened? I'm seeing lots of variability in plots, and a lot of it has to do with silking date too. So some of this we can manage and have an explanation for. Some is simply weather, right? I have a plot an hour to the southeast of here. It's been dry, but we got a nice rain when the early hybrids are pollinating. My 90-day hybrid in that plot might beat my 110-day hybrid because it got really hot and dry at the back end. So we're gonna see a plot where the early hybrids do a lot better than the late hybrids, and we're gonna have to keep that in mind when we're understanding data that, you know, this is at play, but also just plain old weather is at play this season, right? So don't take everything for granted in your backyard. You probably wanna look at multiple locations of data, multiple years to make your decisions for next year, where you're stressed. Where you're not as stressed, keep on rocking out and let's hope it rains again next year. But for now, you know, that's why we do 2-year data sets at OCC, right? We do all that because every year is different. So we worked that on corn. We thought, well, we're gonna start looking at beans maybe a little similarly.
Before you switch to beans, short question, you have 24 to 38, that is a humongous.
So the point,
What would be the perfect rate for this year under these conditions on both varieties?
well, so that's why we do the spread. So the reality too is in all my work I do, we have a middle pop. The normal pop I recommend to everyone is 34,000, right? 34,000, some hybrids. Pardon?
Standing or planting?
Wow. We drop 36 and we have a 34 final in all our tests. So whenever we talk, we always talk final. Here too, I actually planted this all at 38, then went out with a hoe when it was like this big and pulled every plant out to make a nice spacing and make sure I had the population I wanted, right? At the end of the day, what we find, the best producers have an ear count somewhere between 31.5 and 33.5. Once you get over that, you need really fertile, high water holding capacity soil to maximize the yield potential there, or pick a hybrid like this hybrid. So this year, we should have been on the bottom of the range is the reality. We range every hybrid in our book, that's always final stand. This hybrid we have at 34 to 36. The reality this year is we probably should have been 32 to 34. That hybrid we would have at 28 to 34 because it has so much flex. Again, we probably should have been at 32 to 26 depending on soil type. So 2,000 less plants per acre was probably the right answer this year, but not 2,000 less plants per acre because it didn't come up well. 2,000 less plants per acre because they're spaced properly, right? Because what I'm seeing even in these fields that are counting low, they're not flexing because the plant was still stressed with a runt or just the scenario of the season. All our work, we also do a standard population at 34,000 because what we're trying to find is where is the plateau on a hybrid? Where do we cap it out? Or is it, you know, a total parabola? Is the high at 32,000 and then we really tank it? Which in this demo, all I'm trying to find is what does the hybrid do under stress? So by not stressing it at 24,000, I see something, and then by stressing it really hard at 38,000, I see something, and that's what I'm seeing. I lost kernels with the one hybrid, I lost kernel weight with the other hybrid. So would I recommend these populations? Probably not. This hybrid, I do go to this high of an ear count under perfect scenarios.
You had two calves there. Were the same amount of, on the ring, same amount of kernels? You had the one that had a bigger kernels and the one that had smaller?
Yeah.
Did you have the same
Yeah, they're about, yeah, they are the same. Like on average, they were the same, but that's a good comment. When we have less rounds, we usually do have bigger kernels. But that's the other problem when we do a yield check for you, like big picture wise, is hybrids with lots of kernels yield check better than hybrids with big kernels because we use the same divisor on yield tour. Whereas when we're out in the field or I'm doing a yield check for you personally, and if I know your hybrid, I might change that divisor a bit based on the hybrid, knowing, hey, the kernels are going to be bigger than this divisor or they're going to be a little smaller. Any other questions?
On power spot, is one spray enough?
Under normal circumstances, the answer is yes. If you're in the deep southwest with the wrong hybrid, with a really susceptible hybrid, either a late spray or 2 sprays may be necessary. The wrong fungicide can also lead to an outcome where you need 2 fungicides. When we look at tar spot, Veltima is probably the strongest for tar spot. Most circumstances, the most economical with Veltima is 1 pass. When we look at like a Moravis, it would need 2 passes under high tar spot pressure. Delero Complete, they registered a new high rate with top up with Proline. That we have, we haven't had the pressure this year to really evaluate that fungicide, but I would expect it to have similar performance to Veltima with maybe a little bit of an edge on Dawn. But last year we did have some positive ROI on 2 apps, but last year was probably about as bad as tar spot got. And not ROI in your area, Larry, not in like Binbrook. I don't expect it there. Along the lake where we get that humidity all the time, we need that leaf wetness. That's where we're really going to see a bang for our buck on tar spot and maybe that 2 application world.
Matter which lake?
No. Wow. Huron less so, but Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and we'll see. Eastern Ontario's eventually going to get it. We'll see how bad they get it. Like they have it, but obviously this year with an absolute drought there's no pressure. Even my own field, last year this site had a lot of tar spot last year at this time. It's pretty hard to find a tar spot lesion here this year. And this site too, there's no humidity when you have small plots, right? The wind's going through them all. Stays pretty dry. Any other questions on corn?
You got any tests with row width?
Yeah, so I don't do any work like agronomy work with row width. We work with different guys on row width. What we do see is there are certain hybrids that tend to perform maybe better on narrow rows. Hybrid wise, it depends. The thing with wide rows is it kind of gives you more room to push those populations higher. So what we see is sometimes hybrids like this where it holds the ear really well, they excel under narrow rows. But I've also seen under certain circumstances these hybrids work really well because we can keep that population up a little higher but still have that water, have more space because you're planted more in squares versus, tight, and really see those hybrids perform. But it's really, that's why I would tell everyone, do work on your own farm if you're on narrow rows or whatever, whoever you are, you should be looking at hybrids on your own farm too, because just because I say it works for me doesn't mean it'll work for you.
So the tile are only say 20 feet apart,
Oh, tiling.
and with a different row width, it'll hold moisture more in a drier year. Like next year is going to be more hotter days. Like we had up to what, 28 this year?
Yeah, over 30s?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Talking more.
I mean, if it rainfall, water management, narrow rows are better. If we're back to a normal scenario, there's probably not much of an advantage to narrow rows right now.
No, but the tile will, like your tile closer together will help.
On water management, absolutely. If we're talking tile, right? We tile at home. We did a field of 10-foot centers. Like that's the best on really heavy clay, Haldeman clay, 10-foot center. We did like a field, a demo field, like 2 acres. But everything else is on 20-foot centers. Everything we tile is on 20-foot centers now. But if you want perfect, like on really heavy ground, 10-foot centers is what, getting rid of water, you want tight tiling.
No, but it also holds the water. You'll get your
Oh,
crops will be
I think that humping is actually not holding the water. That's the soil is more porous there because you don't have water tightening that soil up. The roots get down deeper. Get more air in the soil there. Cool. So what's my time at here? Okay, yeah, so we'll quickly go through beans. So we talked about corn, figuring out, hey, what hybrids flex where. When we look at beans, I think we can kind of see the same thing. So Sean's gonna talk a lot about sulfur later, but we're doing sulfur work in Ontario too, and I'm seeing some really big results on some lower organic matter soil. Obviously, if you have livestock in your rotation, we're gonna see less results out of sulfur, likely. But when we plant early or we plant cold, we usually see maybe a better bump. We get better nodulation, we get better late season plant health. I walked my site in Norfolk County. It's probably an 11 CEC, it's a sandy loam. Almost 2% organic matter, and it's like a checkerboard right now, my sulfur treatments. Last year I saw upwards of 30 bushels. But what we're looking at too is fungicide timing on beans, and so a late fungicide like an R4 fungicide when we're all done pod fill, and late season nitrogen with we have some nitrogen plots with a slow release nitrogen product. And same with sulfur, a slow release sulfur product, to see if bean varieties respond differently. Because what we've seen, similar to corn, you guys all know, like, anyone ever plant IPs? How big are those beans? They're usually enormous, right? And what we see is we come on yield tour, if we've ever came to your farm and told you your beans are gonna yield 40 bushels, and then you combine them and they yield 60 bushels. It's because of seed size. Just like kernel weight in corn, we're seeing seed size matter a lot in beans. These two varieties here, an Enlist, and this is an Extend Flex, we're seeing we got lots of pods. These count great, but when do we set pods? We set pods earlier in the season. So will these, because we're having late season drought stress, these varieties with higher seed count per pound, right? More pods, less big beans, out yield these varieties that set less pods. You know, these varieties here, you can see less pods, a lot bigger beans. These varieties need that late season plant health to maximize their yield potential, because we need big beans to maximize yield. No different than big kernels fill the bin faster, big beans fill the bin faster.
You also need rain.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
For the big beans, you need rain.
for sure. So that's what I'm hoping we see, because it's a little bit theoretical because we've just been starting working on it. I expect these varieties with more pods that have more beans already developed may out yield those varieties, where in the last few years, I know a couple of our best varieties have been rocking out yield, but they've also had the biggest beans. Why? Well, August has been full of rain. If we have a perfect finish, we can maximize yield potential with these varieties.
So we never got the rain in September that we needed last year. The bean size were a lot smaller.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I'm wondering if it'll depend on what variety, if varieties will respond differently to the circumstances similar to my corn image there. Anyways, guys, thanks.